September 2013. The dry, stifling air of the Nevada desert hung silent over the Silver Peak mine site, about 5 miles from the town of the same name. The beam from Lieutenant Sarah Whitman's flashlight swept across the layer of sand and gravel, reflecting off the mouth of a shallow pit that had just been dug. "Central, I need the forensics team and coroner's investigators at the scene right away," she said quickly. Over the radio, her voice echoing in the night streaked with red lights from the patrol car. What had started as an excavation to verify a suspect's statement had now become something no one in Silver Peak had ever been ready to face, something that could answer the questions that had haunted Nevada for 35 years. In the shallow earthen pit, they had just found a fragment of human bone, a gold ring engraved with EC, and a swatch of white fabric identical to the blouse Evelyn Crane was wearing on the morning she disappeared in 1978. For over 3 decades, Evelyn's disappearance had been just a name in the dusty files of Nye County. A young teacher who vanished into the desert, leaving behind an empty house and a husband who said she just went for her morning bike ride. No body, no blood, no clues, just unanswered questions. It wasn't until a young cop stumbled upon an old evidence box in 2012 that the forgotten scraps of fabric and cassette tape began to tell their own story. The discovery at the Silver Peak mine wasn't just the end of a missing person case. It was the first domino in a chain of events that exposed secrets buried for decades in a small community where everyone thought they knew each other. Because when the authorities finally identified the suspect and issued an arrest warrant, he wasn't a stranger or a drifter passing through the sands. He was the man the town had trusted, the one neighbors still greeted every morning, and the one who had lived for 35 years carrying this horrific secret. The Evelyn Crane case wasn't just a mystery solved, it was a testament to the persistence of investigators who wouldn't let files gather dust, and to the power of forensic science when DNA, chemicals, and a small cassette tape spoke for a woman who no longer had a chance to speak. It was also a story of a town divided by memory, of how time can bury the truth, but never kill it. Before we continue this chilling story, take a second to hit subscribe and like the video. Your support helps us bring forgotten cases like Evelyn Crane's back into the light, so victims are never forgotten again. Tonight we'll go back to Silver Peak in 1978, trace Evelyn Crane's final steps, and witness the more than 30-year journey to reclaim justice. A journey that finally made the Nevada desert speak. This is a story of loss, lies, resilience, and justice delayed, but never denied. Sunday morning, May 14, 1978. The town of Silver Peak, Nevada, was still hazy as the sun began pouring down onto the cracked dry sand. The air was parched, desert wind blowing through the rows of old wooden houses, carrying the scent of metal and red dust. In a small house on the edge of town, Evelyn Crane, 26, an elementary school teacher, was getting ready for her weekend morning. She put on her white blouse, light blue sweatpants, tied her hair neatly, then checked her turquoise Schwinn bicycle. This was a habit she'd kept for years, biking around the old mine area before it got too hot. Dean Crane, her husband, a hunter and local garage owner, said he was heading out early to hunt a few rabbits near the southern Rock Hills. The two barely spoke that morning, the air in the house strangely quiet. Around 8:45, their neighbor, Mr. Arthur Kelly, saw Evelyn biking down the dusty road heading north, waved, and got a quick smile in return. That was the last time anyone saw her alive. By noon, the Nevada sun beat down harshly, not a soul on the streets. Dean returned at 11, his pickup truck covered in fine dust, rifle in the back. He didn't see his wife anywhere, figured she was still out biking as usual. But by early afternoon, with temperatures over 90 degrees F, neighbors started noticing something off. No one had seen Evelyn come back. Her bike wasn't in the yard, and the front door was still ajar like it had been that morning. One of her friends, Carol Bishop, stopped by, called out with no answer. Dean tried to play it cool, said she might have visited someone, or stopped under a tree along the mine road, but his voice shook a little when he replied. By 3 p.m., The wind picked up, red dust blanketing the paths, and worry spread through the small neighborhood. As the sun dipped behind the hills, no one believed Evelyn had just gone a little farther. At 5 p.m., Dean drove to the Silver Peak police station, walking in with a face pale from sun and stress. He told the duty officer curtly, "My wife went out biking this morning and didn't come back. She's gone." When Dean Crane reported his wife missing, dusk was falling, the last light casting a fiery copper glow over the Nevada desert. The tiny town of Silver Peak, with just over 1,000 residents, buzzed quickly. Nye County Police immediately activated emergency search protocols. Within an hour, 2 patrol cars and a group of local volunteers gathered at the Eastern Mine Road junction, where Evelyn usually biked each morning. The wind whipped hard, nighttime temperatures dropping, but dust still swirled with every turn of the pickup tires, clouding the headlights. Over the radio, the commander's voice crackled hoarse through the wind static. "Split teams, sweep north, 1-mile radius per team. If you spot anything, stop and report immediately." By midnight, the search expanded to the barren land around the abandoned Silver Peak mine number said 4, about 3 miles from the Crane's house. Town men drove pickups with handheld lights, while police brought in tracking dogs. A volunteer civilian pilot flew a small plane circling the area, sweeping lights for glints of metal or odd objects on the sand. Dean was there in the first search group, but his silence caught a few people's attention. He hardly asked questions, just drove behind the convoy, eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. Around 3 a.m., in the dim headlights of a police truck, one of the search teams spotted a shiny object glinting at the edge of the mine road. The turquoise Schwinn bicycle. It lay on its side, front wheels slightly bent, covered in a thin layer of red dust. A few steps away was a white plastic helmet and a small sneaker, seemingly dropped. No blood, no footprints, just the desert's dry silence. Captain Lowell, in charge of the scene, noted first in his log, "Bike positioned as if placed down, no long skid marks, unlikely accident." The whole team combed the area within a 200-meter radius. They swept headlights over every ditch, scrutinized every low bush. Tracking dogs sniffed around the site, but picked up no human scent, just smells of oil, plastic, and sand. A young officer bent down to examine the dust on the frame and noticed a narrow clean streak running along the seat, like a recent handprint. A few meters from the bike's position, they found large truck tire tracks, faintly imprinted in the dry soil, heading south. Lowell had them measure the distance and noted, "Tire treads don't match police or local civilian vehicles, possible out-of-area truck." As dawn began to break, the search team paused to set up barriers. Dean arrived at the scene with 2 friends. He looked at the bike covered with a tarp, stayed silent, not a tear shed. When asked if it was Evelyn's, he just nodded, voice hoarse. "Yeah, she used it every morning." Captain Lowell watched the reaction, then turned to the note-taking officer, "Send dust, soil, and frame samples to the Reno lab." He didn't say it out loud, but in his mind, suspicions were forming. If this was an accident, where was the victim? If no crash marks, no blood, then who placed the bike there? That noon, the search force expanded 4 more miles west, including the Rock Hills, where Dean said he'd hunted rabbits. No further traces of Evelyn. The helmet and shoe were sealed in evidence bags, the scene notes stating clearly, "No signs of struggle, no drag marks, no blood, possible staged scene." On the way back, the desert wind still whistled through the old mine's ventilation shafts, humming like a wail. The midday sun scorched the sand, the sky a blinding white. The Nye County sheriff muttered to his deputy as they climbed into the car, "No random traces, everything here's too neat. Someone staged this." From that moment, the search was no longer just for a missing person. It had turned into a criminal investigation. Silver Peak, peaceful for decades, suddenly became the epicenter of a dusty, silent mystery, where every grain of sand seemed to hide an untold story. The next morning, as the first sunlight hit the red sand dunes around Silver Peak, An official Nye County investigative team was dispatched to the scene. Last night's search now shifted to investigation phase. Captain Frank Lowell, with over 20 years of experience in western Nevada disappearances, took over the case. He paced slowly around the area where the bike was found, carefully noting every detail in his old leather notebook. No crash marks, no struggle signs, front wheel only slightly bent, he said quietly. Voice steady and low. If she really fell, the sand would have sunk deeper than this. The desert wind blew hard, swirling red dust that covered every trace again in minutes. At the Crane's house, police conducted preliminary questioning. Dean sat on a wooden chair in the living room, hands gripping a coffee can tightly. When asked the last time he saw his wife, he answered quickly, as if rehearsed. Around 6 a.m., she was still sleeping. I went out hunting rabbits, got back at 5 p.m. She wasn't there. His voice was even, almost emotionless. Captain Lowell noted the timeline, then asked again, "You hunted alone?" "Yeah." "No one to confirm that?" Dean shrugged. "I always go alone like usual." As he left the room, Lowell paused to observe Dean's hands. On his right forearm was a long, fresh red scratch. "From barbed wire fence," Dean explained. "I snagged it walking the dog." Lowell said nothing, just nodded, but in his mind, he was connecting dots. Left home at 6 a.m., unseen 8:45, neighbor saw Evelyn biking out. 10:30, per Mr. Arthur Kelly. Dean's pickup was still in the yard, and he didn't show up at the station until 5 p.m. That 9-hour gap had no witnesses. The crime scene tech team combed the house and back garage. In a corner, they found a dark oil stain spreading on the cement floor, trailing from the workbench to near the door. An officer bent down to sniff and reported, "Smells like gun oil or metal solvent." Lowell ordered photos and samples preserved. On the floor near the east wall was a small dried brown stain. No one could confirm it was blood, but the color and shape drew attention. The sample was carefully swabbed with a cotton tip and bagged. "She biked every morning?" Lowell asked. "Yeah," Dean replied. "And she always went alone." Outside, 2 officers questioned neighbors. Mr. Arthur Kelly confirmed seeing Evelyn biking that morning and stated clearly, "Around 8:45 I saw her heading north, and Dean's pickup was still in the yard, garage door closed." That detail made Lowell pause his pen when the report came in. If Dean really left at 6 a.m. to hunt, why was the truck still there? And if he only returned at 5 p.m., why did someone say they'd heard an engine start around noon? A woman at the end of the street reported hearing a truck drive by around 11 a.m. Heavy engine like Dean's. By afternoon, the investigative team returned to the bike discovery site. Lowell stood looking at the empty patch of ground, eyes squinting slightly in the harsh sun. His gut feeling was clear, something didn't add up. The bike had fallen in too perfect a spot, the seat unmarred, the chain still showing fresh lubrication marks. He noted in his book, high likelihood the bike was placed down. Victim didn't fall on her own. That evening, Lowell met briefly with the tech team at Silver Peak headquarters. They laid out all the facts, conflicting statements, the scratch, garage evidence, staged bike details. Everything pointed to something domestic, but the final piece was missing. No witnesses, no body, no hard proof. Dean stayed half cooperative, didn't request a lawyer, but didn't add anything else. In the memo to County Police HQ, Lowell wrote, "Continue surveillance on subject Dean Crane, the husband. Unusually calm behavior, inconsistent statements, currently insufficient grounds for charges." He closed the file, gazing out the window toward the dark hills where the old mine lay still. The desert wind rose again, carrying the scrape of sand on tin roofs. Out there in the vast unmarked expanse, a truth might be hidden that he couldn't yet touch. And from that moment, Frank Lowell knew Evelyn Crane's disappearance would never be a simple accident. In the following days, the investigative team focused on gathering any remaining evidence from the scene and around the Crane's home. The dry desert sand and near-constant wind made every trace easy to erase in just hours. Still, under Captain Lowell's command, officers patiently swept every area, hoping for the final clue to Evelyn's disappearance. The turquoise Schwinn bicycle was taken first to Nye County headquarters. Lowell and a tech specialist examined the frame, gears, and seat. The surface had a thin dust layer, but on the crossbar was a narrow clean streak, as if someone had recently gripped it to move it. The tires were barely soiled, indicating it hadn't traveled much over the gravelly mine road. Underneath, they found a few damp soil grains mixed with oil, strong smelling like machine lubricant, not the natural oil scent of the area. A specialist tilted his head and murmured, "Looks like it was placed here, not crashed." Lowell didn't respond, but his gaze lingered on the frame, where a hand grip mark was still visible. A few meters from the bike's position, they seized a white helmet with a small scratch on the right side and the left sneaker nearby. Both items were cleaner than usual, no deep desert dust clinging. When asked, Dean confirmed they were his wife's. He said Evelyn kept things tidy, probably fell off when she crashed. Lowell just nodded slightly, then had all the items sent to the Reno Analysis Center. A few days later, the team returned to the Crane house, this time scrutinizing every nook in the garage. On the workbench, they found a monogrammed EC handkerchief. The embroidery faded to a pale yellow. On the edge was an uneven dark stain, like an absorb of oil or something thicker than water. Dean said it was Evelyn's for wiping the bike. But what caught Lowell's attention more was the faint smell of solvent and burnt metal, familiar to anyone who'd investigated accidents involving chemicals. When digging near the back garage wall foundation, the tech team uncovered a grease oil stain, soaked deep into the soil, dried into dark patches. They sampled it carefully, but the local tech lab at the time lacked detailed analysis equipment. An officer said, "Could be engine oil from a vehicle," Lowell replied slowly. "Could be. But which engine in this house uses oil that smells like that?" Alongside the house collection, they went back to the mine road scene for a final check. Beneath the dry sand, technicians found a large truck tire track faintly imprinted, cutting through the area where the bike was found. The size and depth didn't match any police or local vehicles. Lowell ordered measurements and rubber casts preserved. When preliminarily compared to Dean's pickup, the tread width matched, but the pattern grooves weren't an exact fit. A small detail, but enough for him to note it. During that time, police also asked people near the mine area if they'd heard any unfamiliar truck noises that Sunday morning. An electrician working at the North Pump Station recalled that around 11 a.m., he heard a truck engine echoing through the valley, then it cut off, followed by total silence. But he couldn't pinpoint the direction. Each small piece of evidence gradually piled on Captain Lowell's desk: the suspiciously clean bike, the unsoiled helmet, the oil-soaked handkerchief, the garage stain, the strange tire tracks. None strong enough for charges alone, but pieced together, they painted a strange picture of Evelyn Crane's disappearance. Everything was neat, orderly, as if someone familiar with investigative procedures had staged the scene. Lowell stood in the evidence room, eyeing the carefully numbered bags of items. He knew, in 1978, those things wouldn't yield answers. DNA testing was still a distant concept. Chemical analysis had to be sent out of state, taking months. "Time," he muttered, "is the one thing we don't have." After a month of investigation, no new traces, no body or witnesses found. By midsummer, the desert heat grew fiercer. News reports on Evelyn's disappearance tapered off. Nye County Police officially classified the file as missing person. Unresolved. All evidence was sealed in oil paper and wax, then transferred to storage in Tonopah. In a dark corner of the old warehouse, those evidence bags lay silent for years. The faded bike, the helmet with peeling paint, the handkerchief stiff with oil and sand scents. No one imagined that 3 decades later, those forgotten items would awaken a mystery buried in the Nevada desert. In the weeks that followed, Evelyn Crane's disappearance quickly spread throughout Silver Peak and nearby towns. The Nevada Appeal ran a front-page story with the bold headline, "Young Teacher Vanishes in Desert Police Suspect Abduction." Public pressure forced Nye County Police to expand the investigation in multiple directions, including two prominent names that surfaced: a long-haul truck driver and a drifter named Ray Cooper, who often appeared around the old mine areas. The first, Jack Hanlon, a driver hauling freight on the Las Vegas-Reno route, stated that on the morning of May 14th, he'd driven through a stretch of Highway 95, about 5 miles from Silver Peak. Jack vaguely recalled seeing a woman biking near the mine road edge, wearing a light-colored top, but couldn't identify the face or direction. Police temporarily considered this the most notable lead. They showed Jack photos of Evelyn. He hesitated. Might be her, I'm not sure. I just glanced for a few seconds. Checking his logbook and gas receipts, police confirmed Jack's truck left the Silver Peak area at 9:15 a.m., heading straight to Tonopah without stopping. No evidence he ever turned onto the mine road where the bike was found. The first lid closed quickly. The second was Ray Cooper, a drifter who lived off scavenging scrap metal around abandoned mines. He was arrested a few weeks later in Beatty for petty theft and admitted to being near Silver Peak in May. Police immediately transferred Cooper to Nye County for questioning. The middle-aged man, gaunt with long dust-matted hair, chuckled dryly as he sat down. I heard some lady went missing. Wasn't me. I just dig for beer cans. When asked about the morning of May 14th, Cooper claimed he was sleeping in a rock crevice west of White Cliff Hill, about 10 miles from the scene. A Goldfield gas station owner confirmed seeing him there that afternoon, asking for water. The town of Beatty's citation log also recorded Cooper being checked by local police the next morning. Alibi solid. Meanwhile, the search team continued combing the Silver Peak area for nearly 2 more months. They brought in metal detectors, used horses to reach rocky crevices vehicles couldn't access. No results. The desert seemed to swallow everything. No struggle traces, no new clues, no body. Captain Lowell faced reporters' questions daily, but had nothing left to say beyond the familiar phrase. The investigation is ongoing. As summer passed, theories rose and fell. Some believed Evelyn was abducted by a stranger, but if so, why were her bike and belongings left so neatly? Others suspected an accident, that she might have slipped into a mine shaft, but police had checked every crevice in the area, with nothing found. At this point, quiet suspicion circled back to Dean, but still no concrete evidence. He always had the same answer when pressed. I don't know, maybe she got lost and someone picked her up. A few months later, the official search ended. The case file was marked suspended due to lack of evidence. The police team disbanded, the old scene gradually buried by wind and sand. Lowell stood before a desert map pinned in his office, dozens of red thumbtacks marking dug-up, searched spots. He felt the familiar letdown of a longtime investigator, knowing something was wrong, but unable to prove it. Deep down he harbored a smoldering suspicion that the killer hadn't gone far, maybe still living normally right in town. In the years that followed, Silver Peak returned to its quiet rhythm of life. The townspeople gradually stopped mentioning Evelyn, though every time they passed by mine number 4, anyone would instinctively slow down. Dean sold the small house on the edge of town and moved to Arizona in 1982, telling acquaintances that he wanted to start over. He opened a small auto garage in Prescott, known as a quiet but meticulous worker with a habit of hunting in the fall. Nye County Police no longer had contact with him, as the case had gone cold. As for Captain Lowell, every time he reviewed the photo of the bicycle lying by the ditch, he still couldn't shake the feeling that he'd missed something. No one disappears without leaving a trace, he once told his subordinates. It's just that sometimes we don't have the tools to see them yet. He didn't know that those seemingly meaningless pieces of evidence were lying silently in the Tonopah storage warehouse. The handkerchief, the blouse, and the dry soil grains smelling of oil would one day become the key to cracking the case that all of Nevada thought had been lost to oblivion forever. 3 decades passed. Silver Peak still lay still amid the vast Nevada desert, where wind, sand, and time faded everything, both human footprints and memories. Evelyn Crane's disappearance gradually became an old story, mentioned occasionally like a sad town legend. New residents only vaguely knew that sometime in the 70s, a teacher vanished without a trace. Captain Frank Lowell retired in the early 90s, and Dean Crane, the silent husband from back then, had long left Nevada, opening a small garage in Prescott, Arizona. The case file lay in an old cardboard box, case number 78112C, stacked on a wooden shelf in the Tonopah storage warehouse, covered in dust so thick it nearly blended into the wall color. In 2012, the Nye County Sheriff's Office launched the Cold Case Inventory Project, a program to review unsolved cases from the 1960s, 1980s. The goal was to re-examine all files, digitize data, and cross-reference with modern DNA technology. Lieutenant Sarah Whitman, in charge of the newly formed Cold Case Unit, along with 2 young investigators, was assigned the task of opening each old box to categorize them. On an autumn afternoon, while inventorying at the Tonopah warehouse, Sarah pulled out a worn cardboard box, labeled faintly Crane, Evelyn, missing person, 1978. She bent down to brush off the dust, noticing that beneath the old sealing paper was a cracked red wax seal. When she opened the lid, the dry, musty warehouse air mixed with the smell of old paper and oil wafted out. Inside, everything was arranged almost intact. A white blouse folded neatly in a clear plastic bag, a monogrammed "East" handkerchief, an envelope of crime scene photos, and finally, a small cassette tape in a pale yellow paper bag, unlabeled. Sarah carefully put on gloves, lifted the blouse into the light. The brown stain at the cuff was still there, dried but distinct. She turned to her colleague. In 1978, they didn't have DNA. "We should send this out." The colleague nodded, noted the new box code, then repackaged all the evidence in modern preservation bags. In the days that followed, samples from the blouse and handkerchief were sent to the Nevada State Forensic Laboratory in Carson City for STR-DNA testing, something that in the late 70s, investigators couldn't even imagine. Sarah included a memo: request DNA analysis, check for possible match in CODIS system. She didn't expect much. Most samples from that era were degraded by heat, light, or outdated sealing methods. But deep down, Sarah had a feeling this was a special case. While reorganizing the evidence box, she noticed the small cassette tape. The label was faded, no date or name recorded. It could have just been a police recording or evidence seized from the victim's home. Sarah slipped it into a separate bag, marked audio recovery later. Though old recording equipment was outdated, the state of Nevada partnered with a forensic audio lab in Reno capable of digitizing vintage tapes. She noted, check contents after DNA results. A week later, in an internal meeting, Sarah reported the discovery to the Nye County Sheriff. The older man just nodded, voice gravelly. "I remember that one. No one solved it. If technology can do something now, give it a try. But don't expect miracles." Sarah didn't respond, but determination gleamed in her eyes. To her, every forgotten case carried unheard voices, and sometimes just a single hair or old blood stain was enough to make time yield. On December 5, 2012, the Crane-Evelyn file was officially added to Nevada's Cold Case Review list. Among more than 100 other cases, few retained evidence as intact as this. When the archivist staff affixed a new label to the box, the old paper peeled away to reveal the faded handwriting that Captain Lowell had scrawled years ago. "Nobody cannot conclude." 35 years had passed since he wrote that line. And now, as Evelyn's old fabric samples were sent out, a thin thread between past and present began to tighten, pulling the seemingly forgotten disappearance back into the light, where Nevada's justice still awaited completion. February 2013. Nevada State Forensic Laboratory, Carson City. On a cold, clear morning, when the technicians opened the preservation bag labeled Crane, Evelyn, 1978. No one expected it contained the linchpin for a case dormant for over 30 years. The white blouse was removed first. It had yellowed at the cuffs, the fabric brittle and thin from age, but the brown stains were still visible, streaked faintly, as if soaked from the inside. Lead technician Linda Tran, in charge of the ancient DNA unit, carefully cut a small piece from the cuff area. This sample might still have epithelial cells if it was directly exposed to blood or sweat, she said, voice low but excited. They began the DNA extraction process using modern STR techniques, something no U.S. lab in 1978 could have done. 2 weeks later, the first results appeared on screen. A complete genetic profile was reconstructed, stronger than they imagined. Linda accessed the CODIS database, the National DNA Repository, and ran the match. Just minutes later, the screen displayed the alert. Match found. Subject, Dean Crane, Prescott, Arizona. Entry year 2009. The lab fell silent for a few seconds. Dean Crane, the husband once suspected but never charged, now appeared in the system due to a 2009 illegal hunting violation that required him to provide a DNA sample to Arizona state authorities. The DNA from Evelyn's blouse matched that profile at 13 identifying genetic loci, random match probability virtually zero. Linda stared at the screen, took a deep breath, and called Lieutenant Sarah Whitman. Sarah, I think you want to hear this. The DNA on the victim's blouse is a perfect match to the husband, Dean Crane. At the other end of the line, Sarah was silent for a few seconds, before replying. So after 35 years, we have our first lead. Upon deeper analysis, the lab also uncovered an unexpected detail in the cuff stain area. Not only was there diluted blood, but traces of ketamine, a potent anesthetic commonly used in veterinary medicine. Gas chromatography, mass spectrometry, GCMS results showed concentrations high enough for immediate unconsciousness. Can't be coincidental, Linda noted. An average civilian wouldn't have reason to possess ketamine back then. The report was drafted that same day. Victim's fabric sample contains evidence of ketamine exposure, likely direct contact. Not stopping there, the specialists expanded testing to the monogrammed ECE handkerchief. Evidence once seized from the Crane garage. Under the microscope, they found a short dark brown hair stuck firmly to the fabric edge. The hair had no root, but still enough nuclear DNA for analysis. When compared, the results matched Dean Crane again. 2 independent samples, 2 different pieces of evidence, but both pointing to the same man. Sarah received the printed report, reading each line slowly. No doubt anymore, she said to the investigative team. The last person with Evelyn, before she vanished, was her husband. The final part of the analysis was the 1978 oil and soil samples from the bicycle and garage. Though dried and degraded, the chemistry lab extracted a small amount of hydrocarbons. Component analysis revealed a rare synthetic additive used in tranquilizer gun maintenance oil, equipment commonly associated with illegal big game hunters. When Sarah read that detail, she looked up and asked, "Did Dean ever have a hunting license?" An investigator quickly checked the old files. Yes. In 1977, he registered for deer hunting, but was fined for exceeding quota. And per Arizona records, he maintained a hunting license until 2010. The forensic summary was sent to Nye County Sheriff's Office on April 3, 2013. Accompanied by a brief assessment from the state lab, DNA from victim's blouse matches Dean Crane's sample exactly. Traces of ketamine and tranquilizer gun oil present in samples. High likelihood of domestic homicide. Holding the report in her hands, Sarah Whitman sat quietly in her small Tonopah office. Outside the window, wind blew across the desert, carrying fine dust like ash. 35 years earlier, her predecessor, Captain Lowell, had closed this case with a single line, "No body cannot conclude." Now, thanks to a small bloodstain on an old blouse, the truth began to emerge. That evening, Sarah called the Nye County Sheriff. "We have enough to reopen the Crane case," she said curtly. "DNA, chemicals, and physical evidence all point to one man. This isn't a missing person anymore." At the other end, the sheriff replied in a low voice, 35 years, maybe the desert's finally talking." When she hung up, Cold Case File 78112C was officially changed from unresolved to reopened for investigation. On her desk, Evelyn Crane's old evidence box lay open, yellow lamplight reflecting off the frayed white fabric. Somewhere between Carson City and Silver Peak, a secret buried for more than half a lifetime was gradually surfacing from the sands of time, awakened not by confession, but by silent DNA strands that knew how to speak. After the DNA results confirmed Dean Crane's direct involvement in the disappearance, the Nye County Sheriff's Office reopened the file and formed a special investigative team. Lieutenant Sarah Whitman was appointed team lead. The first objective, reconstruct the entire 1978 crime scene using all available data, photos, and preserved evidence. From the Tonopah storage warehouse, old black and white photos were brought out, dusted clean of thick layers. Among them, the scene from back then was clear. The turquoise bicycle lying on its side at the edge of the dirt road, helmet, and one shoe dropped a few steps away, farther out a flat sandy expanse, with no crash or long skid marks. Sarah placed those photos next to the current topographic map. Though over 30 years had passed, the Nevada desert terrain had changed little. Red dirt hills, a few low bushes, and the winding old mine road still there. The crime scene reconstruction team resurveyed the entire area using 3D laser scanners, modern technology, allowing them to recreate the terrain with under 2 centimeters error. They rebuilt the slope angle, wind direction, and ditch depth where the bike was found. The simulation results on screen showed, if a person truly crashed there at average bicycle speed, the wheels would leave at least a 2-meter skid mark, and the body would roll downhill with momentum. But the original photos showed no skids, nor impact damage on the bike. Sarah pointed to the reconstruction image, telling the team, "Look, the bike is almost upright. It didn't fall, it was placed." Data from the model also showed the helmet and shoe landed too far apart for a normal crash. Everything at the scene, Sarah concluded, was staged. They moved to detailed analysis of the large truck tire tracks photographed in 1978. Using geometric comparison software, the tech team identified the tread pattern matching 1976 Goodyear mud grip tires, a line commonly used on hunting pickups. Dean Crane had owned a 1975 Ford F-100, a coincidence too glaring to ignore. The shallow imprints indicated the vehicle stopped very briefly, long enough for the driver to unload something, then leave. A specialist simulated Dean's possible movements that morning, per the old statement. He left home at 6 a.m., but neighbors saw his truck still there until nearly 9. From home to mine number 4 was only a 15-minute drive, too close for such a large time gap. If Dean killed his wife in the house or garage, he could have transported the body here, staged the crash, then returned home before anyone noticed, Sarah said, eyes fixed on the 3D model projection. When the investigative team completed the scene reconstruction, they stated bluntly in the internal report, physical elements at the scene inconsistent with accident, wind direction, terrain, and evidence placement indicate intentional staging. Victim could not have died from bicycle crash. Now, the only question left was, where was Evelyn Crane's body? Based on the old facts, Sarah revisited Dean's 1978 statement, where he said that morning he went hunting in the southern mine area. She had someone cross-reference the old mine maps and realized Silver Peak Mine number 4 was only about 3 miles from where the bike was found. It was a former silver mining area, now abandoned, with dozens of deep pits, small tunnels, and flat clearings enough to conceal anything. Reviewing satellite imagery, Sarah noticed an odd depression, a 3-meter oval, near the mine road edge, as if someone had dug and hastily refilled. The next day, she and the forensics team went to the scene, bringing 3D scan maps and ground-penetrating radar GPR equipment. Desert wind blew fiercely, the smell of sand and old metal mingling. "If he really buried her here," Sarah said, eyes on the depression, "we've been circling her for 35 years without knowing." GPR results showed an anomalous subsurface area under the gravel, different density from the surrounding. GPR couldn't confirm what it was, but clearly there had been digging. Sarah ordered the area cordoned, coordinates marked, and an official excavation proposal sent to Carson City. In the report to superiors, she wrote just one short line: "Based on scene data and modern analytical technology, we determine high likelihood that Silver Peak Mine No. 4 contains the remains of victim Evelyn Crane." After 35 years, the seemingly closed crime scene picture reopened, not by hunch, but by data and laser light. The Nevada desert remained silent, but beneath its soil, the truth seemed to have begun shifting. Once the scene reconstruction was complete, the investigative team turned to processing the last remaining evidence in the file, the micro-cassette tape found in the original case box. The small tape, yellowed plastic, slightly warped inside, unlabeled with no date. On the case was faint handwriting in blue ink: "Kitchen May." No one knew who wrote that. Lieutenant Sarah Whitman sent the tape to the Reno Forensic Audio Lab, equipped for recovering vintage tapes. Technicians spent days just cleaning, stabilizing temperature, and digitizing the under 20-minute recording. One afternoon, Sarah got the call: "We've recovered the audio. You should hear it in person." She drove to Reno the next morning. In the small room, soft light, and only the faint hum of playback equipment, the specialist hit play. At first just static, wind, light clinks like someone adjusting a mic. Then a woman's voice emerged, faint but recognizable. "Okay, hope this works. If anything happens, someone will know." Sarah froze. It was Evelyn Crane's voice, thin timbre, trembling, interspersed with quick breaths. She was speaking alone, seemingly self-recording, with a small mic hidden in the kitchen. After a few seconds of silence, a different male voice appeared, soft, intimate. "Evie, I think you're worrying too much. It's okay." The technician adjusted frequencies, the sound clarifying. Evelyn replied, voice lowered. "You don't understand, Jeff. Dean's watching me. He knows everything, even when I call. I'm scared. I just need proof, in case something happens." Sarah listened, gripping her notebook tightly. The name Jeff, the man on the tape, appeared for the first time in the entire file. They talked for a few more minutes, Evelyn's voice full of tension, recounting Dean's unexplained rages, smashing things, then apologizing right after. "He says he'll never let me leave. You get it. Never." Around the 10-minute mark, the tape shifted to jumbled sounds, a door opening, then heavy footsteps approaching. Evelyn's voice cut off mid-sentence. Another male voice rang out, low, familiar, laced with suppressed anger. "What are you doing in here?" Evelyn's voice trembled. "No, nothing. Who the hell are you talking to?" As the technician raised the volume, something could be heard dropping to the floor, followed by a long silence, interspersed with heavy breaths. Finally, Dean's voice, low, almost growled through clenched teeth. "If you record me one more time, no one will ever find you." Then the tape ended, just lingering static. Sarah sat still, eyes hardening. Beside her, the forensic specialist removed his headphones, murmuring, "That's the end. We confirmed the final male voice is Dean Crane. Matches the sample from his 1978 interview." She said nothing for a long while. This tape, though under 20 minutes long, contained everything 35 years of investigation couldn't prove: motive, domestic conflict, and an affair that made Dean explode. From Evelyn's words, the recording could be pinpointed to early May, just days before she vanished, meaning Evelyn knew she was in danger and tried to create evidence. As she left the lab, Sarah paused at the window overlooking the hazy, distant mountains. She felt the eerie silence of Nevada, the silence that had shrouded this case for decades. But now, Evelyn's trembling voice had pierced that veil of time, returning to tell the missing part of the story. That evening, a copy of the tape was sealed and sent to Nye County headquarters, accompanied by the official report. Audio evidence confirms victim Evelyn Crane feared being stalked and threatened by her husband before disappearing. At the end of the tape is Dean Crane's voice with a direct threat. This is considered indirect evidence, establishing motive and timeline of the crime. Sarah placed the digitized cassette tape on the table, looking at the faded kitchen May inscription worn by the years. Sometimes, justice doesn't come from loud discoveries, but from small sounds like this, where a woman knew something terrible was about to happen, and left the world with one final warning. After the cassette tape was recovered and confirmed Dean Crane's threatening behavior toward his wife, the investigative team expanded in a new direction, tracing the origin of the ketamine, the anesthetic found in Evelyn's fabric samples. This chemical evidence was the missing piece. If they could prove Dean had possessed that drug, they would have the direct link between the husband and the criminal act. Lieutenant Sarah Whitman sent an official request to the Nevada Board of Pharmacy and veterinary medical examiners to retrieve all ketamine purchase records from the 1970s. It was meticulous work, as the paper records were mostly stored in a Reno warehouse, never digitized. A week later, Sarah received a call from a veteran employee of the agency, Mr. Howard Pierce, who had worked there since 1975. His voice trembled, but was clear. "We have the original sales ledger. His name is in it." When Sarah arrived in Reno, Howard pulled out a leather-bound handwritten ledger, the pages yellowed. He pointed to a line written in blue ink, May 9, 1978. Dean A. Crane, Silver Peak, purchased 10 vials of ketamine, product code K32, for large animals. Under the notes column was a smaller line, "Customer has hunting license, said for tranquilizing deer." Sarah read the line over and over, a chill running down her spine. May 9th, only 5 days before Evelyn disappeared. Mrs. Mary Ellen, the sales clerk at the time, now over 70, still lived in the Reno suburbs. Sarah tracked her down for an interview. When asked, Mary Ellen recalled immediately, "I'll never forget that man. He was tall, sturdy, polite in speech, but his eyes were ice cold. I asked what he was using the ketamine for, and he said to shoot deer without ruining the hide. At the time, I thought it was odd. Who needs veterinary anesthetic for hunting?" She hesitated, then added, "I handed it to him personally that Thursday, and Sunday morning, the paper ran the story about the teacher missing in Silver Peak." Sarah returned to Tonopah with copies of the invoice, signature, and Mary Ellen's notarized statement. The file was immediately forwarded to the state prosecutor. The evidence was no longer indirect. Dean had purchased the exact drug, matching the substance found on his wife's blouse. She continued seeking witnesses around Silver Peak, among those who had worked with Dean at the old garage. A retired mechanic named Carl Jensen recalled, "Dean was obsessed with hunting. Once he bragged to me, 'I have a way to drop a deer without spilling a drop of blood.' I thought he was joking, but now," Carl paused, sighing, "I probably should have reported it to the police back then." The investigative team began reconstructing Dean's schedule in the week Evelyn disappeared. They found a copy of a fuel receipt from May 13, 1978, at the Silver Peak gas station, clearly listing Dean A. Crane's name and signature. An elderly station attendant, after reviewing an old photo, confirmed, "Yeah, I remember him. That morning he bought gas, said he was heading to the southern mine areas to test his gun." That was the morning Evelyn disappeared. The facts now aligned in a chilling way. Dean bought ketamine on May 9th, was present in Silver Peak on the morning of the 14th, where Evelyn left home on her bike and never returned. That chemical appeared on the victim's blouse. All evidence converged in one direction. Dean Crane had planned it in advance. Sarah noted in the investigative report, perpetrator had knowledge of anesthetics, had means of transportation, pickup truck, and motive to control victim. Evidence shows premeditation at least 5 days before the crime. Looking back at the map pinned on the wall, Sarah connected the timeline points: Reno, where Dean bought the ketamine; Silver Peak, where Evelyn disappeared; Mine No. 4, the suspected burial site. The red lines linking the 3 points snaked across the desert, like fiery snake trails on the sand. That evening, she called the Nevada state prosecutor. "I think it's time to request a search warrant," she said. "We have DNA, chemicals, witnesses, and matching timeline. If Dean kept anything from back then, it's in Prescott. At the other end, the prosecutor replied slowly, 35 years, Sarah. He thinks it's all buried. But if what you say is true, we're about to prove one thing: the Nevada desert can hide anything except sin. In the yellow lamplight of the office, Sarah looked back at the old photo of Evelyn Crane, the young woman with a gentle smile, bright eyes against the desert sky. Now each piece of evidence was gradually piecing together the only story, a story of a seasoned hunter husband, using his own skills and tools to hunt his final prey, the wife who had trusted him above all. Early July 2013, after more than half a year of reviewing and accumulating evidence, Lieutenant Sarah Whitman's investigative team coordinated with the Prescott, Arizona Police Department for the next step: the search of Dean Crane's home. The investigation had gone far enough to prove that this man was not just the last witness, but very likely the killer who had lived free for the past 35 years. On the early morning of July 2nd, the Nye County investigative team's vehicle pulled up in front of the gray wooden house on the edge of Prescott. Dean Crane, now 61, lived alone, operating a small garage behind the house. Neighbors described him as quiet, up early, home late, never caused trouble. But to Sarah, that silence seemed like a veil hiding something deeper. When Prescott police knocked on the door, Dean opened it with a surprised look, his eyes flashing tension at the sight of the search warrant signed by a Nevada state court. "What's this about?" he asked, voice hoarse. Sarah stood right behind the lead officer, replying curtly, "We're reinvestigating your wife Evelyn Crane's disappearance." Dean stared for a few seconds, then stepped back inside without another word. The house was unnaturally neat. Everything was aligned straight, from toolboxes to books on shelves. The living room had no family photos, only hunting pictures and deer antlers mounted along the walls. Behind the house, the old garage was where Dean worked daily, the smell of oil, metal, and bleach mingling in the air. As technicians began searching, Sarah noticed a small locked wooden cabinet in the garage corner. After opening it, inside was a metal box containing a tranquilizer gun, 3 old syringes, and several small empty vials crusted dry. "Do you have a permit for this?" an officer asked. Dean just shrugged, saying, "I use it for injured wildlife. It's not against the law." But Sarah knew this was the exact device that could deliver ketamine without leaving a bloody wound, matching the traces found on Evelyn's blouse. While searching the adjacent cabinet, they discovered an old leather-bound notebook, thick and edge-worn, labeled Hunting Log 1977, 1979. Sarah put on gloves, flipping through pages of deer hunts, animal traps, and curt notes. But midway through, she stopped. On the page dated May 14, 1978, in bold handwriting, pressed deep into the paper, "He stopped fighting at last." No more lines after that. The next page blank. Sarah felt her throat go dry. That short line, combined with everything they had, DNA, ketamine, witness statements, the audio tape, was the final piece closing the entire picture. She signaled the technician to photograph it, seizing the notebook along with all the tools in the garage. The investigative team also sampled oil from the workbench and floor. When sent to the Phoenix lab for comparison, results returned after 3 days. The composition matched exactly the oil sample collected from Dean's garage in 1978. The specialized oil for maintaining tranquilizer guns. Additionally, one old syringe still held traces of chemical compatible with ketamine K32, the exact product line Dean had purchased in Reno that year. That evening, Sarah submitted the preliminary report to the Nevada state prosecutor, including all photographed evidence. In the affidavit, she wrote, "Prescott search yields equipment, chemicals, and documents proving preparation and use of ketamine. Notebook entry indicates victim was subdued and lost ability to resist. Recommend arrest warrant for Dean A. Crane on first-degree murder charges." On July 4, 2013, while Prescott residents prepared for Independence Day fireworks, Sarah and the prosecutor received court approval. Arrest warrant number 13147C was signed that night. Looking at the red-stamped warrant, she couldn't suppress the heavy feeling, a mix of professional satisfaction and deep sorrow. 35 years, a forgotten woman, and now all evidence pointed to the man who had vowed to protect her. Before leaving Prescott, Sarah stood outside Dean's garage, where yellow light shone on rows of gleaming antlers. Each horn was a hunter's trophy, but now, that hunter had been hunted back by the very traces he left behind. On the morning of September 9, 2013, Prescott's air still carried the late summer chill. The small street leading to Dean Crane's neighborhood remained as quiet as any other day. Outside, familiar neighbors were watering plants, unaware that in just minutes, an arrest would shatter the image of the man they still called good old Mr. Dean from the garage down the street. At 6:45 a.m., 4 police vehicles pulled up in front of the gray wooden house. Prescott police, coordinating with the Nye County investigative team, were ready. Sarah Whitman stood in the yard, holding the arrest warrant. In the dry, still air, the door knock rang out 3 times, short but firm. No answer. The door cracked open seconds later, Dean appearing in an old t-shirt, his graying hair tousled. Morning sunlight hit his face, tired but not surprised. "Mr. Dean Crane?" Sarah asked. "Yeah," he replied, voice hoarse. "I'm Lieutenant Sarah Whitman, Nye County Sheriff's Office, Nevada. You're under arrest in connection with your wife Evelyn Crane's 1978 disappearance." Dean looked at her for a few seconds. No questions, no reaction. As the Prescott officer stepped forward to read his Miranda rights, he just nodded slightly, eyes vacant toward the empty space behind Sarah, where wind rustled dry pines. No yelling, no resistance, just the heavy silence of a man who had waited for this for a long time, without admitting it. Police cuffed him and led him to the car. Neighbors began gathering, faces surprised and murmuring. "Can't be," someone said. "He's gentle," another whispered. "His wife, the teacher who went missing way back." Right. News spread faster than they thought. Within hours, Nevada and Arizona news sites blared, 1978, cold case solved. After 35 years, husband arrested in Prescott, Arizona. In the car, Dean sat still, hands cuffed, gaze somber out the window. Prescott faded behind, replaced by red earth and sand of the western plateau. Sarah sat across, observing him. She tried to find some expression, fear, regret, anger, but saw only cold emptiness. "Do you have anything to say?" she asked, after a long silence. Dean turned, voice low. "I didn't do anything, she just left." Sarah didn't respond. She pulled from her file folder a photo, the old blouse with the brown stain, and placed it before him. "This blood matches your DNA, and the hair found on the handkerchief too." Dean glanced briefly, then looked away. "You can say whatever you want," he said softly. "I didn't kill anyone." The long drive to Carson City passed in silence. Outside, sand and mountains blended, Nevada's sky vast and endless, swallowing the small convoy racing through. Sarah looked at the man before her, thinking of Evelyn, the woman who had tried to record her final words, so that if anything happened, someone would know. And now, all the evidence was speaking for her. When the convoy reached the Nevada State Police headquarters, reporters were already there. Dozens of lenses captured the moment Dean was led inside, hands cuffed, head low, but steps still slow and steady. A local journalist shouted, "Do you regret it, Mr. Crane?" Dean didn't answer. The metal door closed behind him, the sound heavy like the final lock on 35 years of silence. In the Carson City interrogation room, white lights reflected off the cold steel table. Dean sat across from Sarah, his appointed public defender beside him, while she opened her briefcase, methodically placing before him the things that shattered time's dust. The 1978 bicycle photo, the ketamine purchase invoice, the hunting log, and finally the audio tape transcript. "Do you recognize the voice in this?" she asked calmly. Dean glanced at the recorder, then avoided her eyes. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied, voice even and cold. Sarah didn't press. She knew sometimes a guilty man's silence was the biggest confession. As she stepped out, She glanced through the small window. Dean still sat there, hands clasped, light slanting across a face hard as stone. That night, Carson City didn't sleep. National news outlets broke the arrest story, calling it one of Nevada's longest-running cold cases cracked. Hundreds of comments flooded online. Some pitying Evelyn, others outraged at justice too late. But for Sarah, amid the noise, only silence remained. A case at the final threshold, and tomorrow, as the sun rose over the desert mountains, she would step back into the interrogation room, where that silent man, whether he wanted to or not, would face the truth he had buried for half a lifetime. The formal interrogation began on the morning of September 10, 2013, in the Nevada State Police questioning room in Carson City. The small room, white lights casting down on the cold steel table, held just two: Dean Crane sitting stone-faced and still, and Lieutenant Sarah Whitman, who had pursued this case for over a year. In the corner, a small camera was already rolling, capturing every movement, every blink. Sarah started with basic questions, voice steady and patient. "Mr. Dean, you still maintain you don't know what happened to your wife, right?" Dean nodded, eyes down at his hands. "I've said it." She left. Sarah opened her briefcase, pulling out the first photo, the white blouse with the brown stain. "This blood is identified as yours," she said, sliding the photo toward him. "And this," she opened another sheet, "is the chemical report. Ketamine. The drug you bought in 1978 in Reno." Dean glanced briefly, said nothing. Sarah didn't stop. She turned on the recorder, Evelyn's voice filling the room, faint, trembling. "If anything happens, someone will know." Then Dean's growled tone, "If you record me one more time, no one will ever find you." The room fell silent. Dean closed his eyes for a few seconds, then looked up, sighing. "I've said she left," Sarah replied softly, eyes unwavering. "No one leaves behind blood, anesthetic, and their husband's threatening voice." Time dragged. For the first 6 hours, Dean stayed silent. He gave short answers, sometimes curt, trying to seem unconcerned. But Sarah didn't back down. She circled questions, shifting tactics, mixing evidence, small details, and pauses that made the other hear their own breathing. By the 8th hour, as the lights began tiring the eyes, Dean suddenly spoke, voice hoarse. "You don't understand. Evelyn, she wanted to leave. She said she was leaving me." Sarah seized the opening. "And what did you do?" Dean was silent a long time, hands clasped. "I just wanted her to stay," he said softly, almost a whisper. "She was screaming, throwing things, saying there was someone else. I lost control." He paused, took a deep breath, then let it out like surrender. "I got the vial, just wanted her to sleep a bit. But she fell, and didn't wake up." The room grew colder. Sarah asked slowly, word by word, "What drug are you talking about?" Dean replied, eyes vacant. "Ketamine. I mixed a light dose, I thought. I used the tranquilizer gun, like I do with deer. I didn't know it was that strong. And after that," Dean silent for seconds, "I panicked. I took her away, to the old mine, south of Silver Peak. I buried her there." Sarah looked at him, eyes no longer angry, just weary. "Specifically where?" Dean looked up, for the first time his eyes meeting hers. "Mine number 4, north side, small road with a broken power pole. She's there." That statement, clearly captured on camera, marked the complete collapse of the man who had been silent for 35 years. Sarah said no more. She turned off the recorder, left the room while Dean bowed his head, hands trembling slightly, eyes fixed on the concrete floor. That afternoon, the police convoy headed back to Silver Peak, where the sun was setting behind the White Mountains. Dean sat in the back seat, handcuffed, directing them. Desert wind blew through the window, the smell of dry earth and scorched sun filling the car. As they turned onto the old road to Silver Peak Mine Number 4, Dean said to stop. "Here," he said, "right there behind the big rock." Police marked the location, filming the entire process. Dean pointed, voice raspy. "I dug about 3 feet deep. I didn't think anyone would find it. I just wanted it all to end." He said nothing more. That evening, as the convoy returned to Carson City, The confession video recording was backed up and sealed as official evidence. In the frame, the man once considered the town's best hunter sat dazed, eyes staring into the distance, uttering his final words before the police turned off the camera. "I just wanted her to be quiet, but she stayed quiet forever." That statement closed the 8-hour interrogation and opened the final chapter of the case. Nevada had waited over 30 years for the journey to recover the woman buried in the desert. Along with the truth, the killer could no longer escape. 2 days after Dean Crane's confession, the Nevada State Forensics team was dispatched to Silver Peak to excavate the area he had pointed out. It was the morning of September 12, 2013, the air still cold, thin fog draping the distant hazy Silver Mountains. The trail leading to Silver Peak Mine Number 4 showed almost no human traces, only sand, rocks, and low parched bushes. Desert wind whipped fiercely, carrying red dust swirling around the police convoy. Dean was escorted in a separate vehicle, accompanied by 2 officers. When the group arrived, he silently looked out the window, eyes sunken deep. "There," he said softly, voice echoing from afar. Behind that rock, Sarah Whitman signaled the forensics team to mark the area. A row of yellow tape was strung around a roughly 10-square-meter patch of ground. GPR, ground-penetrating radar, was set down. The screen showed anomalous return lines, a sunken area about a meter deep, with different density from the surroundings. "There's something here," the technician said, eyes fixed on the screen. Sarah just nodded slightly. She stood a few meters away, watching the specialists begin digging layer by layer of dry soil, careful as if afraid to break something fragile across time. After nearly 2 hours, the shovel blade hit something hard. A dry crunch echoed across the desert. Everyone fell silent. The technician switched to brushes and small tools, gently sweeping away the sand bit by bit. Then gradually, a white bone fragment emerged, small but clearly human-shaped. Soon after, they spotted a gold ring, dust-caked with EC, engraved on the inside. Sarah held her breath. She recalled Dean's words, "I just wanted her to be quiet." Now, amid the cold earth, Evelyn had truly been silent for over 30 years. As more soil was removed, the forensics team uncovered a few scraps of fabric still clinging, frayed but gleaming white threads under the sunlight, the same material as the blouse police had seized in 1978. Everyone stood still for a moment. No one said a word. The entire area was sealed off. The Nye County Sheriff ordered photos, measurements, and samples sent to the Carson City lab. As the bone fragments were lifted from the pit, the wind picked up stronger, whipping sand into a blinding haze, as if the desert was resisting being awakened from its long sleep by human hands. 3 days later, dental identification results confirmed what everyone had known, but still shuddered to hear. The bones belonged to Evelyn Crane, matching perfectly with the dental records kept by the Silver Peak town dentist from 1976. On one arm bone fragment, a faint chemical residue clung. When sent for analysis, the lab detected ketamine traces in the bone marrow, concentrations sufficient to cause unconsciousness within minutes, if injected directly. The same drug Dean had purchased, the same K32 batch from Reno, 1978. The forensic report summarized briefly but chillingly. Cause of death, ketamine poisoning, possibly via injection or tranquilizer device. Identity confirmed, Evelyn Crane, female, 26 years old, missing May 14, 1978. Sarah read the report in her office, her hand trembling slightly as it touched the photo of the wedding ring. Under the room's light, the EC engraved deep into the dulled metal, like proof of a love that once existed, then strangled by the very hand that gave it. That afternoon, police brought Dean Crane to the scene to corroborate his statement. He walked slowly, hands cuffed, eyes fixed on the temporarily refilled pit where the bones had been removed. "I didn't think they'd still find it," he said softly, expressionless. Sarah stood beside him, voice calm. "Evelyn has been found, Mr. Crane. Finally, she's coming home." Dean didn't respond, just bowed his head, wind tousling his hair wildly. News of Evelyn Crane's body discovery spread across Nevada overnight. Local papers ran photos of the forensics team working in the desert. Bold headlines blaring, 35 years later, missing Silver Peak woman's remains exhumed. With this discovery, Case File 78112C was officially changed in the state's system from missing person to homicide, confirmed. In Carson City's new electronic system, Evelyn Crane's name lit up among hundreds of other cold cases, with the note, "Case solved, victim identified." As dusk fell over the Nevada mountains that day, the investigative team packed up the scene. Sarah was the last to leave. She turned back to look at the freshly leveled ground where the bone fragments had lain silent for 3 decades. "You're not forgotten anymore," she whispered. Desert wind rose again, swirling fine sand to cover their footprints, as if the desert wanted to keep the secret once more, but justice this time had arrived before the wind. Mid-October 2013, just weeks after Evelyn Crane's remains were exhumed, the Nevada State Prosecutor's Office officially took over the entire investigative file. In Carson City, the second-floor Nye County Courthouse conference room stayed lit until late night for days on end. Investigators, forensics experts, and prosecutors sat around the long table, facing stacks of documents thousands of pages thick. Every DNA sample, every crime scene photo, every statement, all to be assembled into a complete chain of evidence to indict the man who killed his wife 35 years earlier. On the projector screen, lead prosecutor Thomas Adler, with over 20 years of experience in no-body murder cases, outlined the plan. "We won't let this be a case based on emotion," he said, voice firm. "We have DNA, chemicals, confession, and body. All must be connected by a single thread, logical, precise, irrefutable." The forensics team began reconstructing the forensic timeline. May 9, 1978, Dean Crane purchases 10 vials of ketamine in Reno. Invoice with confirmed signature. May 14, 1978, Evelyn leaves home at 8:45 a.m. Dean claims hunting but actually at home. Same day, Dean's truck tire tracks appear at bike discovery area. Scene staged. Night of May 14th, Evelyn dies from ketamine poisoning. Body buried at Silver Peak Mine No. 4. May 15th, Dean reports wife missing to police, feigning cooperation. 2012. File rediscovered, evidence intact. 2013, DNA from blouse and handkerchief matches. Dean. Audio tape, hunting log, and confession complete the event chain. Adler pointed to the projected screen, where a Nevada map appeared with red arrows linking Reno, Silver Peak, Prescott. "This is the journey of the crime," he said. Dean prepared, executed, concealed, then abandoned everything as if it never happened. The most critical part Adler required the forensics team to verify was the chain of custody. With the case spanning over 3 decades, any minor storage error could invalidate evidence. Technician Linda Tran, who extracted the DNA, presented to the prosecution group. The evidence was manually sealed in 1978 with oil paper and red wax. When opened in 2012, the original seals were intact. No signs of tampering. Each fabric sample, hair fiber, and soil had separate inventory codes. We resealed in modern biohazard bags, ensuring no cross-contamination. All processes were filmed and archived. Adler nodded. "Good. If the defense attacks this point, we stand firm." Then Sarah Whitman was invited to speak. She summarized the entire investigative process, from rediscovering the file to exhuming the body. Her voice steady, unflinching, but each sentence carrying the weight of months poring over desert sands and old files. "We didn't find the crime by intuition, but by science. DNA doesn't lie. Ketamine traces don't lie. And the only person who had both, right at the moment Evelyn disappeared, was Dean Crane." In that meeting, the prosecution team officially settled on charges: first-degree murder, with additional counts: desecration of a corpse, concealment of evidence, and false statements to authorities. As the preliminary indictment was printed, Adler read each count, each word echoing in the pin-drop silent room. Defendant Dean A. Crane, on or about May 14, 1978, in Silver Peak, Nye County, Nevada, did willfully and with premeditation use the anesthetic ketamine, to deprive his wife, Evelyn Crane, of her life, thereafter burying the body to conceal the criminal act. He paused, glancing at Sarah. From now on, this is no longer a cold case. This is murder, proven by science. In the following weeks, prosecutors and federal investigators compiled the court file, over 20 thick volumes, including 3D scans of Silver Peak Mine No. 4, original 1978 crime scene photos, and 2013 exhumation photos. Linda Tran's detailed DNA report, Reno ketamine purchase invoice, audio recording of conversation between Evelyn and Jeff Dalton, hunting log with the line "Stop fighting at last," video of confession and body location pointing, each piece of evidence tagged, sequenced chronologically, forming a complete story, the story Evelyn couldn't tell, but science told for her. Early November 2013, the Nevada Supreme Court issued the official notice, State of Nevada versus Dean A. Crane, scheduled for trial at Carson City Court in February 2014. The news broke that night, spreading across local TV stations. Silver Peak residents, who witnessed the 1978 disappearance, watched in silence. Many said that seeing the words "murder trial" set in Evelyn Crane case felt like time reversing, taking them back to that scorching day when the young teacher biked into the desert and never returned. Sarah received a copy of the indictment at day's end. She read it slowly, line by line. In the prosecutor's final notes, one short but vivid sentence: "The evidence existed for 35 years, we just weren't patient enough to listen." That evening, leaving the courthouse, Sarah paused on the steps, looking up at the vast Nevada night sky. Cold starlight shone down on the desert where Evelyn had lived, vanished, and now had justice reclaimed. The journey was nearly over, but she knew the real battle would be in court, where Dean Crane would have to hear every piece of evidence, every voice, every sound he tried to bury. Carson City prepared for a historic trial, the longest-running cold case in Nevada state history, and proof that time can hide human footprints, but not the traces of crime. February 2014, Carson City Courthouse, packed to capacity. Local media, reporters from major papers, and even Silver Peak residents who drove hundreds of miles gathered. 36 years after Evelyn Crane vanished, her name echoed again in a different atmosphere, solemn, heavy, and on the verge of justice restored. In the defendant's chair, Dean Crane, now a silver-haired old man, sat silent, gnarled hands clasped tightly over his stomach, expressionless, eyes on no one. Before him sat a jury of 12, most born after the case occurred. They had no memory of Evelyn, but they were about to hear her full story, told in the language of science. Prosecutor Thomas Adler rose, stepping to the center podium, his voice deep but resonant, each word slicing clear through the air. "Your Honor, today we don't just try a case. We complete a journey time delayed. In May 1978, a wife, a teacher, was deprived of life in her own home. The killer was the one person she trusted most." He paused, staring directly at Dean. 35 years of evasion can't erase the truth. DNA doesn't lie. Ketamine traces don't lie. And Evelyn Crane's body, found beneath the desert sands, says it all. Adler held up the photo of the white blouse, the first exhibit presented. On the large projector screen behind him, the image enlarged, brown stain, frayed threads, DNA sample cut. "This is where we found Dean Crane's blood cells," he said, "from a man who always claimed he wasn't there." Next, he presented the recovered cassette tape. As Evelyn's trembling voice filled the courtroom, the room froze. "If anything happens, someone will know," followed by Dean's low, angry tone. "If you record me one more time, no one will ever find you." A few in the gallery bowed heads, some with tears. Dean sat still, eyes just closing briefly. Next, the prosecution showed the hunting log, with the line, "E stopped fighting at last." Adler read it aloud, then said, Evelyn stopped resisting. This is a confession in his own hand." He turned to the jury, voice lowering. "We don't just have handwriting, we have her body, buried right where he pointed, and bone samples, still containing ketamine traces, the drug Dean Crane bought just 5 days before his wife vanished." As the trial moved to expert forensics testimony, the atmosphere turned to science's cold precision. Technician Linda Tran, the DNA extractor, took the stand, presenting with diagrams and magnified photos. The DNA sample from the 1978 blouse was sealed intact until 2012, she said, pointing to genetic charts. The profile matches Dean Crane's at 13 loci. Random match probability is 1 in 7 trillion. Scientifically, it can't be anyone else. Another expert, Dr. Paul Everett, toxicology specialist, presented the ketamine analysis. In the victim's bone marrow, we detected ketamine K32 traces. This type sold only to veterinary facilities, not available to civilians. The 1978 Reno purchase invoice lists the defendant. Detected concentration equals a large animal sedative dose, far exceeding human safety limits. The defense tried to counter. Dean's attorney Alan Burke argued the client's confession was given under psychological pressure and without counsel present. He told the jury, Dean Crane is a 61-year-old man, questioned for 8 hours in stressful conditions. He just wanted it to end. We can't call that a true confession. Burke also argued, Dean didn't intend to kill, that it was merely an accident from an overdose. He tried painting a picture of a desperate husband who lost control, not a cold-blooded killer. But prosecutor Adler responded swiftly. He held up the 1978 crime scene photo, the bicycle neatly placed by the ditch. If this was an accident, he said, why stage the scene? Why bury his wife, erase every trace, and stay silent for 35 years? He stepped closer to the jury, eyes stern. This wasn't an accident. This was a calculated act, prepared with anesthetic, planning, and coldness. When the court allowed playback of Dean's confession video, the room went deathly quiet. On screen, Dean sat head bowed, voice raspy. I just wanted her to stay. I lost control. Then the scene of him leading police to mine number 4, pointing to the pit. She's there. Sarah Whitman, in the front row, watched the screen. Each image was months of her work, piecing evidence together. In closing arguments, Adler stepped forward without notes, looking straight at the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, Evelyn Crane tried to speak in 1978. She recorded her voice, left her blood on the blouse, and her body, after 35 years, still carried the crime's traces. She spoke, but not in words. Science spoke for her. He paused, voice deepening. Justice is late, but it still comes. As the prosecutor returned to his seat, the room hushed. Dean said nothing, just bowed his head, hands trembling slightly. Defense counsel tried a few more words on remorse, and time passed, but no one listened. The jury was instructed to retire for deliberations. Sarah stepped into the hallway, peering through the glass door. Outside, Carson City's sky faded to pale winter afternoon gold. She knew, whatever the verdict, Evelyn had her voice back. 7 hours later, the bell rang. The jury returned to the courtroom, silent. The court clerk read the verdict, voice resounding. We, the jury of Nye County Court, find the defendant Dean A. Crane guilty of first-degree murder. A collective sigh rippled through the room. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling like she heard the wind through the old mine. Dean Crane lifted his head, face expressionless, then bowed again, shoulders sagging heavy. The trial ended in solemn silence. Press called it a cold case closed by science. And Sarah, stepping into the cold outside, thought only one thing, though it took 35 years, justice wasn't buried. And in Carson City's afternoon light, she seemed to hear a faint whisper, Evelyn's voice, light as desert wind, saying finally, she had been heard. The jury deliberated for 12 hours. All night, lights in the Carson City courthouse deliberation room stayed on, casting a pale yellow glow into the hallway. Outside, Nevada night, cold and dry, desert wind whistling through mountains like an endless sigh. In the waiting area, Sarah Whitman sat still, a cold coffee cup before her. 35 years of waiting for a case, now condensed into those 12 hours. When the courtroom doors opened the next early morning, everyone stood. The jury entered, the 4-person, a middle-aged woman, holding a white sheet of paper. The court clerk asked, "Have you reached a verdict?" She nodded, voice trembling slightly, but clear. "We, the jury of Carson City Court, find the defendant Dean A. Crane guilty of first-degree murder." A wave of silence swept through the gallery, followed by soft sighs mixed with sniffles. Dean sat motionless. He didn't look at anyone, showed no protest. Only his hands on the table trembled faintly, then clasped tightly together. Morning light streamed through the glass window, casting on his face, haggard, ashen, looking at least 10 years older than his age. Sarah looked at him, no hatred, just the cold feeling of an ending. Beside her, Prosecutor Adler nodded slightly, face solemn. He wasn't joyful, nor sad, just the relief of one who had fulfilled justice's final duty. Judge Robert Klein reviewed the file, then pronounced sentence, voice stern resounding in the pin-drop silent courtroom. With irrefutable evidence and the defendant's own confession, the court sentences Dean A. Crane to life imprisonment, without possibility of parole. He will serve at Ely State Prison. As the gavel struck the bench, all sounds in the room seemed to fade. A part of Nevada, the part that had buried sin in sand for 3 decades, finally closed. After the trial, press flooded with news. 1978 cold case solved. Justice for Evelyn Crane. Former Silver Peak residents, now gray-haired, quietly watched the evening news. Some whispering, "She's at peace now." Mine number 4, the former burial site of the crime, became a small memorial spot with a simple plaque engraved, "Evelyn Crane, 1952, 1978. Justice found, 2014. In the Nye County office, file No. 78-112C was pulled for the last time. Sarah stamped the cover in red, boldly printing, "Homicide, solved." The stamp's thud was soft but final, ending the longest case in county history. On the file cover, she added a handwritten note. Persistence solved what time concealed. The Nye County Sheriff's Office summary report was sent to the State Department of Justice, stating, "The Evelyn Crane case proves the role of modern forensic technology in solving cold cases. The combination of evidence preservation, DNA, and chemical analysis accurately reconstructed the crime after over 30 years. In the final memo, names of all involved were listed, from Captain Frank Lowell, the first investigator in 1978, to Lieutenant Sarah Whitman, who brought it back to light. Beside them was a special note from Prosecutor Adler. "This will be a textbook example in every Nevada cold case training course, a lesson in persistence, in the belief that no crime truly disappears." As night fell over Carson City, Sarah left the courthouse in the dry chill typical of desert spring. She paused on the steps, gazing at the deepening purple sky. In her mind, Evelyn's image appeared, the woman in the old photo with a gentle smile, hair lightly blowing in the wind. "You've been heard," Sarah whispered softly. The next day, the official sentence was transferred to Ely Prison. Dean Crane listened silently as it was read again. He said, "Only one short sentence," voice low like desert wind. 35 years was too long, now it's over. Then he signed the document, looking at no one else. In Silver Peak, residents raised funds to rebuild a small playground behind the elementary school where Evelyn once taught. On the new brick wall, they mounted a bronze plaque, dedicated to teacher Evelyn Crane, for those who remained silent, yet are heard by justice. The case closed, but its echo lingered far in training classes for new investigators, in cold case research materials, and in the memories of those who lived under that Nevada sky back then. They understood that justice can be slow, very slow, but like desert sand, it will always find a way to fill the gaps time leaves behind. News of the verdict, just announced, electrified Silver Peak, the town once forgotten amid the Nevada desert, once more. On TV broadcasts, old photos of Dean Crane flashed repeatedly. The man once seen as Nye County's best hunter, the neighbor who fixed cars, now captioned in red, "Murderer sentenced, after 35 years." At the town's only coffee shop, talk buzzed, non-stop. Some voices trembled. Can't believe it, him. Dean, another, replied bitterly. Who would have thought, all these years, he lived calmly, while she lay under the sand. Those who knew Dean split into two sides. One clung to the image of the quiet hunter who helped neighbors patch tires at midnight, rescued a lost child in the woods. The other raged, feeling betrayed. We called him a hero, an elderly man said on local TV, but turns out, that hero killed his wife and staged it, so the whole town pitied him. Meanwhile, those who studied under teacher Evelyn, now parents, carried faint memories of the woman who always smiled kindly and taught kids to plant flowers in the schoolyard. They visited Silver Peak Mine No. 4, where forensics found the body, to lay wildflower bouquets. On the red earth, a new white stone memorial plaque stood, engraved simply, Evelyn Crane, 1952, 1978. Justice found, 2014. A small ceremony took place on a March morning. No music, just desert wind whistling through rock hills. Evelyn's only surviving family, her younger sister, stood silent before the plaque, clutching a bunch of wild daisies. When reporters asked, she said only, "Justice came late, but it came true." Sarah Whitman, who led the investigation, was there too. She stood quietly, hat pulled low, eyes on the plaque, a symbol of all the years humanity fights for truth to be spoken. As wind blew, fine sand dusted lightly over the engraved words, as if the desert wanted to hold that memory one more time. Media across Nevada and Arizona covered it uniformly. 1978, cold case resolved. Nevada honors DNA technology, the Carson City Times wrote. National news showed mine footage with ticker text. After 35 years, the Nevada desert finally speaks. Reporters stood amid barren land, describing the former secret grave, now a pilgrimage site for those who believe in justice. But the aftermath wasn't just mourning, it was awakening. At Nye County Sheriff's Office, Case File 78112C was archived and added to the state's cold case training curriculum. The report titled, "Persistence Solved, What Time Concealed," was reprinted for many courses. Proof of persistence's power, science, and faith. "We want every young investigator to understand," Sarah said in an interview. "Time doesn't erase crime, it just makes truth harder to find." Since then, every May 14th, the day Evelyn vanished, Silver Peak residents gather at the old elementary schoolyard. Children read her name aloud, light candles, and sing Amazing Grace. Tiny lights flicker into the Nevada night sky, blending with wind, threading through sandhills that once hid the town's darkest secret. The Evelyn Crane case didn't just close a crime, it changed how the community viewed justice. For those who lived through both eras, the year she vanished and the year she was found, the feeling never faded. One reporter wrote in the wrap-up, 35 years, a woman silent under sand, waiting for science and human hearts to find her. When truth spoke, it didn't just free one soul, it redeemed a whole community. Now, as dusk falls over Silver Peak, light reddening the barren rock hills, residents here know the desert doesn't just bury, it also returns. And on the white plaque amid the mine, the small line engraved below seems to speak for all. The Nevada desert finally spoke the truth, and we will never forget. The Silver Peak story reminds us that in today's United States, justice often comes from persistence plus science. A tiny bloodstain on a blouse, a hair on a handkerchief, an invoice for 10 vials of ketamine in Reno, a kitchen, May microcassette, and the intact chain of custody for evidence, 78112C, dropped the curtain after 35 years. Real lesson: if you, a loved one, or neighbor shows signs of domestic violence, threats, control, stalking like Dean with Evelyn, treat it as a red line. Document, photograph injuries, save messages, keep a journal, but don't confront the abuser yourself. Use safe channels like 988, 911's hotlines, DV centers, or trusted friends. Report missing early. Don't wait, because time destroys evidence. The blouse and handkerchief sealed promptly allowed 2013 DNA/GCMS to speak for the victim. For communities, don't let halo blind judgment. Silver Peak saw Dean as the model hunter, but the too-neat bike scene was staging. Report anomalies to police instead of rationalizing. For law enforcement in schools, the story underscores cold case training value, 3D scene scans, and file digitization. Prioritize budgets, strict chain of custody so victims' voices are heard later. Finally, as the number 4 Mine Memorial reminds, justice can be slow, but if communities protect truth and victims, every desert will speak. Thank you for following the journey to reclaim justice for Evelyn Crane, proof that truth can be buried, but never disappeared. Subscribe to the channel to join us in exploring more cold cases where justice still awaits awakening.